welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we have a sewing project for you all. It has been a minute since I did my last gunnesax dress, so today I will be making a gunnesax-like dress from a pattern I have done before on this channel. This is one of my favorites. It is McCall's 4381. It is this gorgeous gunnesax look. Like, this is not an official gunnesax pattern. The last one I did this short dress version. I added a ruffle to it, but that is what I did last time, and this time I think it would be fun to do the long dress version with the long sleeves. I think these sleeves are super cute, and I know it is summer. I guess, yeah, by the time you guys see this, it is still summer. It is summer. Long sleeves is maybe a little funny, but I want to make a long sleeves out of this, so that is what we're going to do today. I have made this dress before. I just think I can do it way better than I did before, and I want to add in some trim updates. This dress has pretty simple trim requirements, and I think it would be fun to kind of go a little crazy and add some extra lace and things. So that is what we're going to do. For the fabric, I have this guy here. I will put a close-up of it probably over here because this is my Liberty London fabric from Joann's. It's this beautiful lawn. I'm really excited to use it, and I knew I wanted to use it for a gunnesax pattern that I know I like because obviously this is very expensive fabric. So this is just like pink with a little bit of blue, and so I thought it'd be fun to take the blue and bring it out more with this ribbon. So I'm going to be adding some ribbon and trim accents. We're going to kind of piece this together, try something new. While this will be the same pattern technically as the other dress, I think all the different adornments that I plan on doing with it is going to really change how it looks. So I'm pretty excited about that. This is going to be a straightforward project, so let's go ahead and jump into me cutting. All right, I'm first just cutting away. These are really straightforward. I'm not doing French seams. I'm doing some minor size adjusting in the fact that I'm going to be taking the back and adding just an extra, I think, ½ inch to it, or maybe an inch, just because I think that that helps give me a little more to work with fit-wise if, you know, it gets too tight or too loose. Also, this here is your reminder that I do have a Ko-Fi where you can go over and buy me a coffee. I have it linked down in the description. This just helps support my channel as it is quite expensive to continue to buy all these supplies to make garments, as well as, of course, it takes me a ton of time to produce these videos. Also, I didn't dive into this in the intro, but I did want to make this dress now because of the gunnesax collection that Modcloth released. I just thought it would be interesting to do kind of my cost breakdown in comparison to an actual garment. Of course, there's going to be tons of discrepancies, but I personally opt to not buy from Modcloth because it is rated pretty low on the website. Good on you. It is not transparent at all with where it is produced and the labor conditions it is produced under, as well as they use a lot of polyester, which is obviously an environmental disaster of a fabric, so I just opt to not buy from them. I'll link their Good On You profile down below, but I did want to note that, and yes, I know this video is very late for the Modcloth release. I plan ahead of time and I do my videos a month in advance. So goes slow fashion, I guess. And then for going off pattern, my decision was to just basically rip as many strips as I could of this fabric, which I think ended up being 7, so I'll plan to use 3 panels on top and 4 on the bottom of the layered ruffles. Each of these I think I cut at about 14 inches wide, which will lead to later headaches, but you will see that when it comes. I am starting out where I always do, which is marking all the things. So this here that I'm marking is actually the front bodice lines that at some point I will need to sew down. The other thing I'll be marking here is my darts, and then I will also be pinning those darts. Those are just a couple in the back, not too many darts in this, which I love. And once the darts were in, I sewed the 2 back panels together so that way I could have the zipper stuff kind of pressed and all ready for that. I did this with basting stitches, which is important to note because I will be cutting that back open at some point. And that point is very quickly coming. It is right now. After pressing these open, I am then pulling out all those basting stitches. I could just have, I guess, press this over by 5/8 of an inch, but I like to sew it because I feel like I can get a crisper press for the eventual zipper if I do that. And now I'm working on some of these princess seams. So these I do a little bit of clipping to get them completely even. Also, sorry for the crow cawing in the background. I guess it's their wild time while I'm recording recording this voiceover. And then I'm slowly sewing that princess seam. I am trying to get no weird puckers or pleats in the princess seam while I sew it, which is why I kind of do this a little bit more carefully than some of the other seaming I do. And this one I did have to unpick at least I think 2 or 3 different parts to get some direct pleats out. I realized later that I'm technically covering it all with ribbon, so it doesn't really matter, but it's probably good for my sewing. When I went to sew the princess seams of the actual bodice, I remembered that in those princess seams is supposed to be where the ties go. So I am now halting that process to real quick make the ties. I am speedily stitching this along. This is always kind of a favorite to sew because it's some nice straight lines after working with some not as straight lines. And then I am turning this inside out, which is always kind of a fun challenge. Yes, I know I could make it easier for myself. Am I ever going to? Probably not. I don't know. I've kind of maybe come to like this process. Granted, this fabric's a little easier to do than when I've done like a thicker wool or something like that. And my next step for these is to sew them nice and flat. And now I'm finally basting them in place so I can actually do the princess seam. After sewing this, I am giving it a nice press to try to get the seam nice and curved over the bust line. My camera decided to focus more on the congressional trial I was watching, or not trial, but questionnaire on aliens. I guess I can link it down below if you are so inclined. Whoops. Yes, I did spend 2 hours of my sewing time this project listening to the congressional hearing on aliens. After this, I am joining the shoulders, and once that's done, I am stitching in the trim that's going to be up around the collar. I'm stitching this about 5/8 inch pointing inwards, so that way when I eventually sew it, I can poke it all outwards. You'll see what I mean in a second. Here I am sandwiching that in between the lining, and I'm pinning those together, matching all the seams and notches. Here, the reason that I sewed the trim in the opposite direction that it will eventually face is because this will then make it like stick out of the seam sandwich, I guess you could call it. And then I'm stitching that from the pattern side and following the stitching line that was down when I basted in the initial trim. This will make sure that my seam hits exactly where I plan it to and the trim sticks out of the seam evenly. And now I'm clipping all my seams to get this ready to be pressed. And now I'm finally sewing up my side seams with just the lining and the outer separately. And reminder that I'm not going to finish any of these edges because the lining will hide everything. And then here I'm prepping the armholes for the sleeves by basting the lining to the outer fabric where the sleeves will eventually be set in. And here I'm starting my sleeve construction by making the cuffs, which is this piece, as well as sewing the sleeve seam. This one I am finishing with French seams because I will not be lining the sleeves. All right, good morning. I have already been working on this dress for about 2 days, so I figured it was time for a check-in. Here is what I mainly have done, which is the bodice. So the way this dress is constructed, it puts me in some weird different order conundrums. Basically, I can't put the decorative trim on until I've attached this to the skirt. Then I can't put the sleeves on until the decorative trim is done. So we're kind of at a little bit of a standstill here. I have done a quick fitting of the bodice, and while it does fit, I'm gonna go ahead and let it out about 1 inch because I just think it would be nice to have that little bit of extra wiggle room. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that first thing this morning, which is just gonna be me taking 1/4 inch of the seam allowance out of the side seams to then make it a little bit bigger. But it's looking really, really gorgeous. I can already tell huge construction difference from when I made my last version of this dress. So I'm pretty pleased with that. We're moving along at maybe a slower pace than I would like, but it's okay because this is not the easiest project per se. So yeah, I think what I'm gonna start with this morning is I'm gonna start actually with the bottom ruffle of the skirt and work my way up to the full skirt. Or I debate whether I should attach, because of the way I've also just like altered this pattern and gone a little wild. There's a ton of different ways I could construct this. I'm basically trying to have the least amount of fabric on my sewing machine at any given time. I don't really want to put the sleeves on with the whole skirt on, but I don't really want to necessarily put the skirt ruffles on with the whole dress. So I'm just trying to kind of figure out, morning spooky, exactly how I'm going to go about constructing this. This is what happens when you go very off script from a pattern, is the construction that you're given is no longer relevant. Instead, you're having to kind of make a bunch of order decisions. So that is what you're going to see me do this morning. That is the plan. Here I am sewing up all skirt seams, so the front seam, back seam, and side seams. There should have actually been no front seam here, but I did not read the cutting instructions, so I had a front seam. Whoops, but it's fine. And then the instructions have you sewing these together, the bodice and the other seam, like kind of normal, but I want to have an actual really sharp point on the princess, and I can't make it work if I just do the normal sandwich method. So what I'm doing here is I am ironing the seam allowance, and then I will attach the bodice to this. I'm pretty pleased with myself because I got the additional width I added to both this waist of the skirt and the bodice correct, and everything aligned perfectly, which anytime you are messing with a pattern, it's always pretty pleasing. And honestly, it's pretty pleasing even when you're not messing with a pattern, because it does take accurate cutting as well. And then I will eventually top stitch that down. And now I can install the zipper on the outer fabric. I am first kind of beefing it up with some zipper interfacing tape. And once I'm done with that, I am sewing in the zipper. Again, I do not use any pins when I do this. Usually this turns out okay, but this zipper is definitely a little bit, crooked's the wrong word, but like the waist seam isn't perfectly meeting and things like that. So this one maybe didn't go ideally, but that's okay. And then for the lining, I am again turning up that seam by the seam allowance, before then pinning it down around both the zipper and the waistband to completely enclose all the raw edges that are on the bodice. And then I'm just hand stitching that all around everything. Because these are on seam lines, I can do pretty messy slip stitching. With the initial part of the skirt attached, I now can start to put on all the trim and decorations. I'm first starting with a slightly bigger lace that kind of has this webby pattern that is going to go around like the front of the waist and into the armholes. And this I'm just stitching on semi-messily with a normal stitch because the ribbon's going to cover it. And after changing my thread color to be blue, I am sewing in the ribbon. For the ribbon, I have to go down and around both sides of the ribbon. So first I'm starting with the side of the ribbon that is on top of the lace because I figure I have to go the slowest and most carefully for that because I would like it to cover that. And then on the way back, I will do the other side of the ribbon, which should be a lot easier because it's just the final attaching the ribbon down. And now with the bodice and skirt attached, that allowed me to finish up the trim that I need to before the sleeve. We're now back focusing on the sleeves. And here I am putting in the basting stitches for me to eventually gather the sleeve down. And here I am gathering the end of the sleeve into the cuff. And after I finish sewing that, I am now putting lace on the end of the cuff. This is the same lace that I used on the inside neckline of the dress. And on top of that cuff lace, I am adding on ribbon. And then after doing that, I decided I hated how it looks and unpicked everything, which sometimes it just happens. I mean, if I had pinned my decoration on, I would have figured it out before I actually sewed it on, but that's okay. It is not that terrible to unpick. And then I'm resewing that to the top of the cuff, so there's a little bit more fabric buffer between like the decoration and the end of the sleeve, if that makes sense. And with the sleeve done, it is time for me to gather down the sleeve head and get it in the sleeve hole and sew that all together. For sewing this together, I did decide to use the sleeve arm of my machine, and I am trying to sew this with the bodice on top so I can make sure there's no weird pinches happening in the sleeve hole on the bodice side. Pinches are a little less terrible to happen on the sleeve side because the gathering is on that side. And unfortunately, after trying these on, I hated this plain cuff. It sagged and bagged weird, which this was a wild card alteration on my part, so I guess this is to be expected. It didn't fit in any way, shape, or form the way I wanted to because this sleeve design is built to go into the kind of more fitted forearm cuffs that are 7 inches long instead of the little 1-inch cuff I did. I thought I lengthened the sleeve enough to make up for it, but I clearly didn't, so I am cutting those cuffs off. And then after cutting the sleeves cuff that came with the pattern, I have then gone ahead and sewed up the little line that they show you to, and then I'm pressing that open, and I have also gone ahead and stitched on the trim that will stick out of the wrist cuff, similar to the neckline. And then I followed the instruction of sewing the cuff together. So you see I sewed down where the zipper will go in and then across the cuff where the lace is poking out. And then I have now a very nicely lined cuff. And I did stitch the zipper into the cuff off screen. I thought I got footage of it, but I didn't. But this is the same as any other old zip, except for, unlike the bodice zip, I didn't leave the lining unstitched. So in this case, the zipper is touching my bare arm. But with the cuff now made, I am gathering the sleeve into it. I do also now remember, I forgot to mention that I did increase the size of these cuffs by about, I think, almost 2 whole inches for it to fit my forearm. If you've ever used a 70s pattern with sleeves, the women of the 70s, or I guess the, let's be honest, teenagers, most of these dresses are being made for teenagers, have much thinner arms than me, so I usually have to make these adjustments. And I have done another try on. These sleeves are working for me, so I'm now doing the final stitching of the bias tape I made to finish my sleeve holes. I didn't want to put these in because if I ended up completely abandoning sleeves, I would have had to unpick 3 seams instead of just 1. So now that I'm feeling good about everything, I can finally put that in. And Spooky is getting involved in my sewing and making some biscuits. I am sewing the lining of the cuff here to cover the raw edge left by the stitching of the main part of the sleeve into the cuff. And then looking at some examples of actual gunny sacks online, I finally decided what I was doing with the sleeve decoration. So I added this line of ribbon here, and then I'm going to use the second type of lace about 2 inches up, and a second line of ribbon to kind of make this faux like small cuff end at the end of this larger cuff. Alright, after all that sleeve madness and frustration, I took a couple days off and now I'm back to finally figure out the bottom ruffle. This should be much more straightforward. So here what I'm first doing is I am pinning all my panels together. The top ruffle will have 3 panels and the bottom ruffle will have 4. After paneling these together, it is now time for the gathering stitches. I am running 3 sets of gathering stitches per panel, and I am doing this on each panel separately with a gap, so that way when I'm pulling on the gathering stitch, it's less likely to break, or if it breaks, it will not screw up the whole ruffle. As always, Spooky is kind of watching, kind of annoying. She doesn't know what she wants. I'm going to stitch both my ruffles together before I actually put them on the dress. So here I have already stitched the ruffles together and finished it. I'll show you the inside on the next ruffle, but I'm finally deciding my trimming. I pulled out this larger waist that has a similar web-like quality to it as the smaller lace because I think a bigger lace reads really well at the bottom ruffle of these dresses because it's just less delicate and it's way further away from the eye. So it's just a lot more visible and adds a detail that I really like. Plus it lets me pull yet another trim out of my trim stash, which I always love. And then after I sew that lace down, I am sewing the ribbon on top. I guess my camera was vibrating with my sewing machine because that's some shaky earthquakey footage. And now I'll show you what I did on the first ruffle with the ruffle that I'm actually attaching to the skirt. So this is the skirt or full bodice of the dress, and this is the ruffles that I'm attaching to it. I'm just gathering these down. I have done my usual 4ths trick where I fold everything into quarters. In this case with the dress I didn't have to because there's 4 seams, and then I did have to with the ruffles. Once I have those all, I can gather them down so each quadrant of the ruffle matches the quadrant of the skirt, and that makes it so the gathers are roughly even all the way around the whole dress. And once I've stitched those gathers, I can now yank out all those gathering stitches. This just helps for a just cleaner garment in general because you don't have all these random threads hanging out everywhere. Plus 2 rows of my gathering stitches actually poke below the seam line, and you can leave those in. That is stylistically considered okay, but it's not my stylistic preference, so I am yanking those out. And then I am finishing the seam of the gathered and then the bottom of the dress with a zigzag, so that way when I then put all the decorations on, this is a finished edge that's not just like letting lots of threads hang loose. And here I am adding on the similar kind of wider webbed lace that I used around the bodice, and after I get that done I will then again lay down the ribbon. I was pretty thrilled to have just enough of both of these trims to finish off the dress. And here we hit another mistake. I did not measure each panel correctly, so I did 14 inches for both, which then put this dress as way too long for me. And by the time I hemmed it, there would be so little of that bottom ruffle. So I went to my trusty old sewing books, and I also had just some general memory of some of the Victorian pieces in my closet. And one of the things they do to hem is they actually put in kind of like a pleat or like a pin tuck in the skirt. So that's what I've decided to do here. You can see the one pin tuck kind of up there, and then I'm working on my spacing for my second pin tuck using both an iron and my gauge to get the pin tuck completely even all the way around. And then using that pressed edge as well as the markers on my sewing machine, I am sewing that all the way around at the same width. Before then pressing them in place, I am much happier with now the spacing of the top ruffle and the bottom ruffle. After doing this, it was really worth the pain, but of course it would have been ideal if I just measured correctly in the first place. But after that is done, I am now just double fold hemming the bottom of the ruffle. Normally I do this one turn and then a manual hand sewing, but because I have the ability to let it out from the pin tucks above, I am fine doing just a simple hem here. I like to give my dresses the option to be let out more, and that is still achieved with the pin tucks that are a little bit further up. And now I'm on to the last and most exciting task of lacing up the bodice. I don't know why I love doing this, but I do. So I am lacing this up, and then we are hopping into the reveal. Alright, you have seen the reveal. I don't know, nothing to note there. It was a pretty normal experience with the usual people going by. I'm just used to it at this point, and I smile and feel a little bit awkward. My favorite is, though, a runner crossed right in front of my camera. I think before she realized the camera was there, and she's like, "Oh, sorry, please edit me out." And I was like, yes, I will edit you out. Otherwise, this project is complete, so we will talk cost breakdown as well as my overall thoughts on this pattern and this process. My cost breakdown is going to be a little bit different today, just because I am going to talk a little bit about Modcloth and how much theirs cost and how much is likely going back to their labor versus what should. I'm going to get into that as we go on. I am first going to do my normal materials breakdown, and then when we get into the labor cost breakdown is when we're going to veer a little bit. But I feel like this will really show my thoughts on kind of like Modcloth's gunnesax collection. So for this project, since I did use Liberty of London fabric, it was pricey. My fabric was $178.46. I used about 7 yards. One of those yards was the lining fabric, which is obviously a lot cheaper. That was like $10 a yard versus I think Liberty of London is usually $35 a yard. I got it for 25% off, so it was around $26, $27 a yard. That's why that's that way. Obviously, Modcloth is not making their dresses out of Liberty of London cotton because they would have to charge so much for them. And then my notions cost me $18 for all of the trims, which a lot of these trims I got directly from China, or I got in Korea, or they're mystery. I have a couple trims that I used on this dress that I'm not quite sure where they came from, and then a few were also second hand. And then the notion, so all the zippers as well as all the thread, I went through 4 things of thread for this project, were at $9.28, so that brought me to a notions total of $27.28. And then last, the pattern. This is my second time using this pattern. I did pay $43 for the original pattern, so half of that, since this is my second use, is $21.50. That brings us to a supply total of $227.24. Let's real quick step in talking about labor. I will note, obviously in a factory setting, this dress would not take as long as I took to make it. I took 17 and a half hours to make this. 3 hours I spent unpicking and re-putting on the sleeve, which obviously a factory wouldn't do that. Oh, it's the hemming. This was a bit of a noodle scratcher because I deviated and went on my own pattern, so that didn't fully work out for my best experience. So definitely I like wasted a ton of time of that like 17 and a half hours this took me to make it, but I'm still gonna multiply that. So today we're doing it different. Instead of doing the living wage for Seattle, we are going to do the living wage in Guangzhou, China, which is a place in China that a lot of manufacturing happens, specifically for women's clothing. I know Modcloth stuff is manufactured in China because I know they have made in China on their labels, according to Reddit. I actually don't own any of their stuff. So I chose like a city well known for its women's clothing production, essentially, because that you can find on the internet. And then I used a site called Numbeo, which they help do cost of living calculations, and I checked their Seattle cost of living calculation and it actually pretty much aligned with what I know about living in Seattle. So I went ahead and used their numbers for China. That's where I'm getting all this from. There, a living hourly wage, again, living being can pay their bills, can buy clothes, can eat, only working 40 hours a week is there, which actually I would know if you read Chinese labor laws. I went deep. Sorry, I went real deep. While I know Chinese labor laws are not necessarily enforced, neither are the USA's. For note, Chinese does have more labor laws for their citizens. They are supposed to only work 40 hours a week unless they've negotiated further in their contracts. So the fact that it's well reported that factory laborers are working like 7 days a week and often only having 1 day of the month off is definitely a straight up violation of their laws, especially them working 12 hours a day for those 7 days and only 1 day off a month. Yeah, that is absolutely illegal. If you know what's going on in the LA fashion district here, where most clothing made in the US, they have a lot of similar labor violations. So it's not, I guess, necessarily surprising that China has them too. And I do want to also note China is where you go for manufacturing. They have a lot of really high technology and you can find really ethical factories there. There's a lot of ethical companies that do produce out of China. Modcloth, however, is likely not one of them. I'm going to say allegedly to cover my butt, but from what I can tell off their website and everything, I would say they are likely not using ethical labor practices. All that to say, I'm going to multiply that 17 and a half hours by $6.92, which is the living wage per hour in Guangzhou, China. That brings your labor total to $121.10. This is again why you would use, if you wanted to pay a living wage, you would still maybe use laborers in China versus Seattle, because obviously I do $32 an hour because that's Seattle's living wage. So that's a significantly lower living wage. However, that would bring this dress's base cost to $348.34. And we're talking base cost. We also are not factoring in the cost of production, shipping, fitting. Likely because of some of the smocking in the back, I would guess that Modcloth skipped some fitting steps. I would be curious if any of you bought from this collection, if you had any like weird fit stuff. And obviously Modcloth is not using, again, Liberty of London cotton. Likely their trim is not cotton as well. They only clarify what the cloth itself is made of, which is 100% cotton, which I will give them credit for that. They could have done a poly blend. It might have made their import taxing cheaper. So I will give them a little bit of props for using cotton. However, cotton in China is risky because where they produce their cotton has a ton of slave labor issues. However, I will say I don't know where Liberty of London produces their cotton, and I definitely probably have Chinese cotton here. So I'm not gonna hypocritically harp on them. However, I am one person not making a profit. But generally, when you price a dress, you would price it at about 60% profit, knowing that eventually you will probably put it on sale. Likely they won't ever put their gunnesax collection on sale. But if I was to... So about a 60% profit would mean I would have to sell this dress at $730.68 to make anything near the profit margins Modcloth is likely making. I did a lot of research to get all this math. Yeah, so that is what you would have to buy to have an ethically made dress that's also made out of Liberty London cotton. Again, not completely comparable. However, I do want to talk about this dress range. Prices are between $139 and $199. I will note that none of them have set-in sleeves, which actually is a huge cost. And as you know by my labor, it was a journey. And also, when you're working with an arm cuff here, you're working with a lot of fitting issues that likely Modcloth would not want to introduce into their line. So everything is pretty much tank top. It was also summer release, so that checks out. Other ones where I saw tulip sleeve and then straight up spaghetti strap, so obviously that reduces manufacturing costs. According to, I think it's Clean Clothes Campaign, again, I'm going to link all my sources down below, only about 3% of what a garment it costs goes back to your factory worker, which means your factory worker is getting paid $6 for this dress, which means for them to be paid a living wage, they would have to make this dress in about 50 minutes, which is not likely. I feel like I get a lot of you in my comments saying like, oh, they can produce dresses so much faster. We're gonna really do some sketchy sourcing here. I was trying to find how many dresses per workday. According to ChatGPT, which can skim the internet quickly, they said a garment maker can make 10 to 30 dresses per workday. Take that with a huge grain of salt because ChatGPT doesn't have to cite its sources, and I could not find its source when I Googled the exact phrasing it used. So again, huge grain of salt, but regardless, I am solidly gonna say you cannot cut and make this dress in 50 minutes or any of Modcloth's dress ranges. They are a lot more simple, but with the trims, I'm just gonna say like, I don't care like how professional you are or how factory lined you are. I doubt that dress is getting made in 50 minutes because there's too many steps. These are too complicated of dresses and there's too much trim. So likely their garment workers are not making a living wage, which is why I am personally not interested in buying from them. I also talked a little bit in my voiceover more about what I know about Modcloth's production. I also know multiple people who have worked at the corporate Modcloth and have reported it to be a pretty abusive and terrible environment. I personally would not buy from Modcloth. I would not recommend this collection. And I would say I have bought a ton of gunny dresses over this summer on Poshmark, and I don't think I've paid more than $200 for a single one. So if you are straight size, you can definitely track down a gunnesax that will fit you. If you are plus size, I might give you a little bit of a pass from buying from Modcloth. I do still struggle with this because I feel like the convenience and fashion for Americans is being built off of the backs of women of color in other countries, and that just doesn't quite sit right with me. However, I also don't know what it's like to not get to fit into clothes, especially sustainably. The sustainable movement have completely left out people. I don't know. I've always really struggled with the idea that everybody gets a pass or anybody gets a pass once they know the conditions not going on over there. Overall, the solution for ethical clothing is to buy less new, which that's also a whole different thing in its whole self. This year I've only purchased 3 things new. Again, I have size privilege, and I do understand not everybody has that. And then the other option is to buy more sustainably. I have linked there because Good On You is a resource I used for this research. I have linked them down below. I like to check them for brands. Their rating system isn't perfect because they rate Girlfriend Collective high, and on my personal scale, I would not rate Girlfriend Collective high. So grain of salt also with Good On You, but I do think Good On You at least kind of shows some fashion transparency. However, like rating Girlfriend Collective high means that they are likely falling into greenwashing. Sorry, this is a long cost breakdown, but I'm really passionate about this topic, and I felt like this was finally like a kind of one-for-one example I could talk about. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this made you think. I don't want you to stay up at night for that $30 sweatshirt you bought. I just want you to think about things moving forward. It's better to buy less clothing that's ethical. This is so hypocritical sounding, but like, it's not a human right to look cute. It's a human right to make a living wage, feed yourself, be able to take a shower, not during your lunch break. And also there's a lot of different abuses reported at these factories, including being hit, being essayed, people not seeing, there's just so many allegations there that I just like have a hard time with the idea that my right to look cute or your right to look cute is more important than these women's rights. Because I think often we'll have this conversation where it's like, well, but if it's poor, it's all you can afford. And it's like, yes, that's true, but there's still some nuance there as well. Even if you're poor in America, you're still likely better off than those women in those factories. And this is all very nuanced and complicated, and I'm never going to yell at anybody. I just ask that you think really, really carefully about where you buy your clothes from. Think about the wages of the people working there and their conditions, because I'm a big believer in also like the tide rises all boats. So if we take care of those women in those factories, it will result in better care for us at our workplaces. But again, I understand that I'm speaking from such a place of privilege, and because of that, I will lose nuance because I work at a tech company. I have been in toxic work environments, but they're nothing compared to the toxic work environments when I worked minimum wage in America was. Yeah, all that to say, I'm a hypocrite, and I fully acknowledge that, and like, I'm not gonna come really hard down on somebody else for their decisions. Again, I just ask that you think critically and carefully about your decisions. Big rant. Now let's actually jump into the final wrap up of this garment where I talk about all the things. Here she is. I will say, okay, so when I was sewing, I was thinking this Liberty London cotton is dumb. It's dumb to pay that much for cotton. I still kind of stand behind this. I do think $35 a yard for cotton lawn is bonkers, and you can find something comparable for like $25 range. But once I wore this, my mind maybe changed a little bit. This just wears so comfily because of the fabric. Like, I felt so good sensory wise. I wore it on like an 80-degree day, full long sleeves, full skirt. I mean, you saw the reveal. It felt so good. I felt cool. I felt calm. I felt collected. I felt girly and pretty. And I didn't feel hot. So I will eat some of my words about kind of thinking shit on Liberty Cotton. However, I'm not gonna fully take back at all. I still think you could find a really high quality cotton lawn that is not Liberty of London, that is not that expensive. I would buy it again, only on sale, but I would buy it again because I do really love the way this dress feels. As far as trims, I cannot figure out where I bought all these trims. I know this one, I'll link the one that I used to thread. This I got from a website in Korea. I did not actually buy this in Korea in person. I cannot for the life of me figure out where I got this little webby one. This one down here, I bought secondhand on Etsy. And then the ribbon, I'll also link. I can link the color and everything that I got off Etsy. This was super cheap. I think I probably got it shipped directly from China. So yeah, I'll link everything I can down below. A couple things to note, the zippers in here don't match. Because I don't buy my zippers brand new and I buy them secondhand, I wasn't gonna have a matching set of zippers for the cuffs. I think they're close enough, it doesn't bother me. And one at least does match the back zipper. I am really happy with the finishings of this garment. It is beautiful on the inside. It's going to hold up really well. It's gonna wash really well. I will just throw this guy in the machine. No hesitation. Oh, the other thing I bought this in Korea, these little stringies. But yeah, no, this dress makes me feel stunning and it feels so nice. I actually do really like the sleeves. I was semi-skeptical and I was not happy about all the changes I had to make to the sleeves. But once I did it, I loved it and it was okay. Which is, I don't know, I'm just silly sometimes. I did have to decide how to trim them myself and I still don't know if I chose right. And then the last thing that I'm super pleased about, well, so the zipper is not even. I probably actually should redo the zipper at some point, but I do really love this very clean finish inside where the zipper is tucked inside the lining. This is good for my sensory. Also, I have my little label that I thought about ahead of time to put in there. I think in general, I've been thinking about more often lining my bodice with a really lightweight cotton lawn because it doesn't really add much heat or whatever to it, but it does add the comfort of none of the seams touching my body. It's actually definitely lazier to make this with a cotton lining because then I don't have to think about all those seam finishings. Oh, the last thing that I would maybe, guess I haven't really gone through my negatives. The zippers bubbled really bad here, and I don't know if it's because it's interfaced or exactly what happened, but I do feel like they're bubbled, or it might just be like not 100% the correct measurement for my length here, which wouldn't necessarily be surprising since I'm fairly short. Other thing, I would probably next time interface this collar piece here. It does kind of tend to slouch and fall open, which is not my favorite. I mean, if I really want to, I could go back and interface this now. It would be kind of a lot of work. I'll see how I feel about it. I think I'm okay without it. And it would also make the dress warmer, so likely I will skip it, but it's something I'm gonna note for myself in the future when I use this pattern. Last time I used this pattern, I was just not a great sewer comparatively. I also think last time I took length out of the back, and that might have helped the collar stand a little better. Because last time I made this was at a sewing retreat. I mean, I have this video linked. But the last time I made it, I was at a sewing retreat and I had other people to help me fit it. That's always a plus. The other thing I am actually really happy with is how I went about the hem. I think the hem looks really, really cute, and I'm really glad I kind of used that Victorian like tucking method to hem the skirt, so that way this was actually the length I want distance-wise. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. Yeah, aside from the zippers, I guess in general, I'm really happy with this piece and I will wear it a ton. Because it's so cooling in the summer, I can tell that probably means like on the flip side, it'll be really nice for fall and winter because I'll be able to layer a ton under it, but also I feel like some of the fabrics like are good at keeping you cool, like a wool crepe will keep you pretty cool in the summer, but it's also pretty good at retaining heat in the winter. So I think that this fabric will probably have a similar dichotomy. But yeah, I adore this dress. I'm really happy I tackled this pattern again. I'm definitely have grown by leaps and bounds, which is, I don't know, it's always fun to see your own growth. I've killed the sewing game in the past year and I feel like I continue to kill it and I'm really, really excited about it. So I think that pretty much wraps us up. I'm about to head into getting light on me that is going to really blow out this camera. So we'll probably wrap this up right here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I also hope this video made you think a little bit more critically about fast fashion, Modcloth, things like that. Shop secondhand, shop small business. Even if a small business doesn't have the best ethical practices, the money is more likely to stay in your community than a big business. So I will not go back into a preach. area. And as always, if you want to support this channel, you can always buy me a coffee over on Ko-fi. It is just always really nice and I really appreciate it. And then there are of course the free ways of supporting me by giving this video a thumbs up, commenting down below, sharing it if you feel the desire. If you haven't subscribed, definitely subscribe and stick around. I upload every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and every other Friday is a sewing project like this one, and I would love to have you along for all of them. And I will see you next time. Bye!